Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we are going to look into top real-time Spring Boot and microservice interview questions that is recently being asked to senior Java developers in 2025. So let's get started. The very first question that is recently being asked nowadays in interviews to senior Java developers is that describe a real-time case where you have optimized your Spring Boot application for cold startup time. What tools and approaches did you use? 90% of us don't even know what cold startup time is in Spring Boot application. So what is cold start in Spring Boot app? A cold start is the first time your application starts from scratch. The time taken for that is the cold start time. So when does this happen? If you're using Kubernetes, a pod starts fresh in Kubernetes after auto scaling, the horizontal auto scaling. In that particular case, when the time taken by that particular pod to start and start serving your request is the cold start time. It is also when in your local you start the run button and after you see your application started at 80 itne seconds. That is the cold start time in your local. Also, when a new container is created, then also it takes time to spin up the service into it so that it is able to run your application or the lambdas. The lambda function start up in Spring context for the first time, that is in serverless architecture in AWS or in Cloud Runs. A service restarts after a crash or a redeployment. Then also the time taken by that service to be up and running to be able to serve your request notes down its time of start as the cold start. And what does cold start consists of? It is a complete process of loading the JVM, initializing your Spring context, instantiating your beans who are eagerly loaded, connecting to your DBs, warming up the caches, setting up the logs, and creating the security filter chain so that all the request bit comes in first, gets into the filters and chains, and then gets into the real controllers. So this process might take anything between 5 to 30 seconds if your application is not properly optimized for a bare minimum cold start. Now, why this cold start a problem? You would say 15 seconds is not a big deal. Also, that is only one time. It is only when you start. After that, it is a warm pod. If it is not serverless, you are in the warm start. It will keep on running. Your request can come and go as and when needed. Why is it such a big problem to you? I don't see a cold start a big problem if it is only one time. That might get into your mind, but it is not the case. In real time, when you go all enterprise level, you have Kubernetes and pods being up and running all the time. There might be the case that pod has the tendency to crash. So now and then, if you have 10 instances, 10 pods running, now and then your pod keeps on refreshing or crashing up and then rebooting. All these 15 seconds gets multiplied to with that 10 number of pods and you have 150 seconds of delays. And those 150 seconds of delays, you will have many of the requests being missed. And that is where you lost your business. So when does this cold start becomes a problem? In a simple local, it is not a problem. You have that patience. You do not have any real-time requests coming in. It's fine. But when you are in production, you are using Kubernetes, you have multiple pods, and when there is a sale going on, when you need to auto scale, then the new pods who are being created might take a longer time to get started. And if the time is too much longer, then user gets errors or a spinner which is running and running and running for 15-20 seconds. And if you have proper health check probe, your load balancer will not be able to divert you to the proper healthy pod unless you have up and running pod in the system. And that's where cold start becomes a problem. The second problem where when cold start is high is the serverless use case. Your serverless becomes completely useless if you have a cold start at a very high level and you have timeouts defined at the lower level. So let's first understand what is serverless platforms. Like AWS Lambda, your code is not always running. Instead, your function boots only when it is called, and this is called a cold start. Then it may stay warm for a while, but it shuts down after some time of inactivity. It's not like the pod. Like once you spin up the pod, it is warm. It is ready to take all the requests getting hit to your system. If you're not using the Spring Boot applications pod, if you're going all serverless, all lambdas, then you are in trouble because it is always going to have the cold start whenever a request comes. Now, it is expected that for the Lambda function, the cold start is the deadliest combination. Reason being, if your Spring Boot takes 15 seconds to start, but your Lambda times out request is only 3 seconds, you are probably dead even before you begin. So your entire function is expected to respond in less than 3 seconds, but your boot up time is only 15 seconds, then your application is not a good application to become a serverless function. So your Spring Boot application can never go serverless in any future. Either you have to reduce this 15 seconds to around 1 second or 2 seconds, or you have to just be in the pod state where it is all time warm instance, always capable enough to take any request getting into your system. But remember, serverless comes with a lot of huge benefits. That is, your application is not always started. Whenever the request comes, the Spring application starts, it takes in the request, it serves it, and when the request is ended, it removes all the resources. If it is all time running and hot, then you will have to pay for all the CPUs, RAM, usages, VMs, everything and anything you have to pay. So your cost gets n number of times more if you're not using serverless situation. The third issue with the cold start is wasted resources. Apps who restarts a lot, that is, if you do the deployment every day or you tries running the integration tests every single day, after your day ends, you push the code, integration test runs, a new pod spins up, each time there's a 15 seconds of delay, and this all eats up the memory time, and every minute of delay is multiplied every day. So this is the problem with the cold start. Also, if there is an error during the startup and your startup only takes 30 minutes, so 30 seconds, then after 30 seconds you will be able to know, that your DB is not reachable. So you realize it late, and you have wasted a lot of time during the startup. Now I'll give you a real world example why this can really be a problem to you. Suppose you are running a payment microservice in Kubernetes. This is not a serverless situation. It is a simple pod which is running the payment microservice in Kubernetes, always a hot machine, always ready to take up the load. What if there is a sale coming up? Under the load situation, your application thinks of scaling up horizontally. But suppose the cold start takes 14 seconds and you're getting 100 requests per second more, and it takes 14 seconds to spin up 10 pods. Then out of those 1400 requests, many of the requests will be dropped and delayed. Let's see at the matrices. Your request rate is 100 requests per second. Your cold start duration is 14 seconds. During the total number of requests coming during this cold start situation is 1400 requests. Now you have suppose an old capacity of 5 pods who is capable of handling 10 requests per second. Then around 700 is the maximum that you can handle, and rest will be the lost situation. So by the time you get up after 14 seconds to the new capacity, you are going to lose a lot of requests. So for that 15 seconds of time, you are not auto-scaled. You are at the initial position only with the 5 pods. So now you understand that we really need the cold start to be properly optimized and prevent the delay during the startup of the application. To reduce this initial startup time, you can, if you handle it properly, what will be the benefit you will get? You will respond faster. You will be able to auto-scale reliably, and there will be no delay in the auto-scaling process. You can restart quickly your pods if it is crashed, because the nature of pods are crashable. Possibly be usable in serverless architecture. If your application is not having a good cold start optimization, you are completely out of the serverless job or market. You cannot use your application in serverless functions at all. So typically the target for microservice for good cold start optimized application is it should start within 5 seconds. And to become an eligible candidate for serverless or functionless architecture like AWS Lambdas, you have to keep your cold start optimized under 1 second. Now you'd ask me, how would I optimize it? If it is 15 seconds for me, how would I optimize and start my application really early? The way to do that is to analyze your startup bottlenecks. Not all applications will have this bottleneck. if you have in a very start of your application, it's not a big application, it's not a multi-module project, it's not a heavy microservice architect proper application, then you might have even lesser cold start. But if it is more, find out the bottlenecks. How do you find out the bottleneck? Using actuator. The actuator has an endpoint called a startup, which is able to document which bean is taking how much time to boot up at the startup. And that is how, with the help of actuator and the startup endpoint, you will be able to document which bean is taking a lot of time. So what you have to do is add this dependency of actuator, expose the startup endpoint, and as soon as you hit this particular endpoint, you will get an output like timeline. Which event, which class name is having what much duration of in milliseconds to get boot up or startup. And similarly, you can document all of those beans who are taking a very long time during instantiation. And this is where the bottleneck happens. So you focus your optimization areas and efforts there. Now you would ask me, okay, I have printed all the beans who are taking a lot of time to initialize. What is the solution? Solution is the lazy initialization process. Do not instantiate unnecessary beans during startup. The default behavior of Spring is to eagerly initialize all the singleton beans in the Spring Boot application. But you might not need them all immediately. As soon as your application starts, person will come to the system, give the orders, place the payments, then call the email service or the Slack notifier service. At the startup, you do not need these beans to be created. So what you can do is either you can globally do the lazy initialization of beans, or you can set the property like this, or even better, this is not a good solution. I would not suggest that. You first figure out that these particular Slack notifiers, email notifiers are not required as soon as the application boots up. So if not done at 15 seconds, it can be done after the 30 seconds and reduce my cold start time from 15 seconds to 10 seconds. So what you can fine tune at the class level that this is a configuration bean. I have multiple beans being created here. So here, while creating the Slack notifier, I'm marking it as lazy initialized. So benefit of this lazy initialization of beans reduces your 2 to 3 seconds because many beans were not required at the startup time or special and are used only under special events. So your email notification will only be used when your order has been placed successfully, and it might not be within 15 seconds of your pod startup. It takes time to get the request, place the order, call the payment service, get the payment service, and there is the time when you can start up your Slack notifiers or email notifiers. So that is how you can reduce by lazy initialization. Third is you can remove the unused auto configurations. Now, if you make your debug as true, that is a logging level as true, you have lots of logs in the system. Now, remember, this is only when I'm telling you in local and dev. It is not for production. If you enable the debug as true, then the logs that you is very much verbose. You will not be able to find the exact information in the logs or errors in the logs because it is too much verbose. So what you can do is in the lower environments, you can mark the debug as true. It will log all the auto configuration beans in the Spring Boot. There are many unnecessary beans unless explicitly needed, like mailing, JMS messaging, securities, and all those things. So the Spring logs which auto configurations were matched and was auto configured and which were excluded during the startup. Now in the positive matched situation, you can explicitly exclude the auto configuration of such beans. So this debug equals to true feature logs the full configuration report. It helps with the excluding of unnecessary unused components for faster startup, and is used in only local and dev only. Don't do this kind of stuff in production. Don't. Once you have all those properly noted down that yes, you can exclude these are auto-configured matched dependencies, you can exclude like this. So now what will happen? These class won't be scanned or registered during the startup, and it saves the scanning and instantiation time and will optimize your cold start. Fourth, very beautiful way is tweaking the database initialization. Now, most of the data source beans takes a lot of time. Even multiple times I've seen it takes almost 3 seconds to instantiate, to connect and see if it is possible to connect and all those things. And there are multiple flyway, liquid-based schema validations and all those things which takes a lot of time to be added to the cold start. So you can disable the Liquibase in non-critical environment, in the local environments, and you can just explicitly add only in the context of fraud that in the non-critical environment, do not instantiate the data source as it is, as and when the application starts. You can just also mark it as lazy, all the data sources, and create only and only when the real database call happens. So this prevents you from having a very long time delayed in the cold start for database creation, validations, logic creations, and your Liquibase and all those things start up. There is another pro tip that if you have any post construct in your beans or configuration classes, then avoid any database calls like to create the cache at the first hand to fetch all the states, that is static data for your country. Don't do that in the post construct of the beans. It will add up to your initialization time, because it will hit the database, get the data, store it in memory or in your cache or in the Redis or somewhere, and all this time you will be waiting for your application to get started. So avoid any blocking calls at the startup. You can do it always when and wherever needed. The fifth part is you can trim the starter and dependencies. Now, the starter dependencies brings a lot of transitive classes and configs, like Spring Boot starter web brings Jackson, Tomcat, logging, and all those things. So if you're not using MVC, do not use starter web. Rather, you can go with Webflux. Or you can entirely skip the web for the background or worker threads, and you can just use the starter, Spring Boot starter. Also, you can remove the actuator and matrices if you're not actively using them, which I will not suggest that. It is just a suggestion, but I will never suggest that, because these actuators are the one who helps you to see what is really happening in the system and the production. So try to reduce your transitive dependencies and replace your starter dependencies with the lower level of dependencies. That I can say. So a fewer starter dependencies, a fewer auto configuration, less of the class path scanning, less of the bin creation and class path bloating, and hence the good cold starter, optimized one. The sixth and a very optional one, this is specific to very specific applications which actually can go to the native image. Only for them this option is. You can ignore this if needed, but this is a very fast way of actually instantiating your application by creating a native images. What is AOT plus native image? AOT is ahead of time compilation. So instead of compiling your code at runtime, AOT compiles your system at the build time into native executable, no JVM needed. And it basically supports natively with three things: the GraalVM, the starter native dependency, and AOT engine, which optimizes and flattens the Spring internals to create a native executable build image. Now you'd ask me how GraalVM helps us. Now initially, the traditional Spring Boot application has the JVM as the runtime. But with the native image, you have no JVM, you have just the native binary. The startup time can lie anytime for the traditional Spring Boot application between 3 to 30 seconds. While when it comes to the native executable image, which is created at the compile time itself, it is less than 1 second. And hence is a beautiful way of converting your application to a serverless system or serverless functions, where your cold start is less than 1 second and you can easily have your timeouts around 3 seconds. Memory footprint is a very big problem with the traditional Spring Boot application, which is as high as 100 to 300 MBs. But for the image, since it is just a simple image, it is around 60 MBs. Garbage collection overhead comes because it has the JVM. JVM has to be garbage collected. But since it is using the native memory allocations, it is very minimal for the garbage collection overhead. The original Spring Boot application relies heavily at runtime for reflections, but you can still... So reflection is a problem. I agree to that. If you're using GraalVM, the reflection is a problem because the preprocessor will not be able to do the things at runtime. But there are hacks that you can use hints into the preprocessor to give that this can be at the runtime being changed by reflection APIs. Spring uses lots of reflection APIs like Hibernate, Jackson. But the problem with the native images, it can pre-compute this, so startup is almost instantaneous. Now you would ask me, how would I build this native image with GraalVM? So you have to have Spring Boot 3.1 plus. You should have GraalVM with a native image installed. You should have the Maven plugin and native Maven plugin, and you should add the starter native as the dependency. Now, to generate the optimized source from your AOT engine, you can run this AOT generate. And to compile your native binary, you can use native binary, and then this generates a my app native binary, which is runnable and it is there in the target application. Now, this image is actually capable enough to boot up in 0.5 seconds, and it uses not more than 60 MBs of RAM, and it works very great and seamlessly with the serverless architecture like AWS Lambdas. But there are limitations of using GraalVM. There's a reflection problem. Native image can't guess the dynamic behavior because it's runtime situation. The reflection works at runtime. But there are hacks and reflection hints and JSON hits which can be used as a workaround. There's a slow build time for GraalVM. The compilation is very slow because of the compilation itself. The native image is created in the target folder. So the workaround is you can use parallel builds. The issue with GraalVM is debugging is harder. No hot reload, no stack trace symbols, but you can always use logs and static analysis for understanding. There is limited support for third party. Understand this, that GraalVM is very new. Some libraries heavily depends upon the third party library, heavily depends upon the reflection APIs because it was an older, well-known concept. So now, as a workaround, you can try to stick with the third parties who are GraalVM friendly and who are most updated ones, because GraalVM is a very new technology. The Hibernate and Jackson issues comes because we have lazy proxies and deserialization. So rather than that, you can use native image properties or Spring hints to initialize them either eagerly. But if you're using GraalVM, these issues are bound to happen. Now, what is the best case of using the AOT? When you need a cold start to be very much optimized or even less than 1 second for the serverless functions, then you can use AOT plus native images. When you want to cut on the RAM size and when you have to have the predictable workload and don't need dynamic runtime behaviors like with the reflection, you can easily go with the AOT native images. So to summarize, this if you use GraalVM with AOT and native image, then your startup time is less than 1 second, which is a good feature for serverless architecture. The memory usage is released a lot. Only 60 MB of RAM will be used, not more than that. The ideal for serverless architecture toolchain. What is the bare minimum requirement for your GraalVM implementation is you should have a GraalVM, AOT, and Spring Boot 3 is the minimum requirement for implementation of this. The limitations comes with debugging issue, a reflection issue, and the build speed is slow because at the compile time itself the image is created. And the current situation is it is stable and supported with all the Spring Boot application working on the version more than 3.1. Now, this was the way how you can reduce your cold start using the GraalVM image. Now, there is one more explicit way, which is a bonus. I mean, this is too much high level. If you're at architect level or team lead level, this might be a good solution to you. Very less known solution, but it is a good solution. Now, you can enable the class path indexion. Let's go to the basics. In the Spring application, how are your configurations being scanned and created as a bean? So at the startup itself, your crawler goes and each and every package, scan them, find, oh, this is where the component lies, this is where the service lies, this is where the repository lies, this is where entity lies. And these are all the places where during scanning, I want to scan it up and create the bean out of it. Now, this is at the runtime, and which increases your cold start because cold start is calculated at the runtime during the Spring Boot startup. What if I say you can do it at the compile time itself? So that is the problem which is solved by this enabling the class path index, which internally generates a class path.index file for faster component scanning. So if I give you the list of all the files that go here, you will be able to get a bean. And you just have to instantiate it at runtime. Then your scanning part is completely removed from the initial setup. So due to slow class path scanning, we were facing cold start problem. So when Spring Boot start, it scans your component, service, entity, repository configurations, discover your entity classes, find custom annotations and beans to register. By default, this scanning is done package by package across the complete class path entries in the jar in the class files. And if your project is very, very big, then it becomes the bottleneck. Suppose if you have a monolith or a very big microservice architecture, or you have multi-module Spring Boot application, or with the multiple nested packages or the transitive dependencies of jar, you are in trouble because these scanning takes a lot of time and adds to your cold start problem. Now, what is the solution to this? You can instantiate your class path indexing by Spring context indexing as true. As soon as you do this, there is a pre-generated index called as in the meta-inf spring.components. Now, this file contains all the locations of your component, configuration, controller, and everything. Now, as you have the configuration processor here, this target class will have this particular components file be generated, and each line is annotated like this is a service, which is it is of the stereotype service. And this is how all your classes will be added to this particular file, and which will help you at the runtime, because at runtime they will only read this particular file. It will exactly fetch where the component is present and just instantiate the life cycle of this particular service. So how it helps in the cold start? It scans the whole class path at runtime without indexing, but with indexing it reads the pre-built file called as spring.components. Now without indexing it is slower. With indexing it is faster startup, no need for deep scanning. It affects the larger, bigger Spring Boot applications a lot, and by using indexing it improves the performance. Now, if you have a very small application, the difference that is created by this class time indexing is very less. So, if you have a very small application, don't do this. If you have medium to large applications with hundreds of milliseconds to seconds faster, the improvement will be a lot. From seconds to milliseconds, you will come down. So, if you have a big complex application, you can always try creating this custom class path file at the build only, at the compile time only, and the runtime, your cold start time will be a very much reduced part. So if you mark this as true, it enables the pre-built class scanning path of indexes. It will create this particular file at build time or the compile time only, which enables the faster startup, but it is best for large applications, serverless architecture, because your startup time will be very reduced because of this. And that is how your class path indexing is very much helpful. So what is the result snapshot? If you are doing the lazy initialization, you can save around 2.5 seconds. Like beans like notifiers, loggers, emails can be later on also initialized. If you exclude auto configuration of multiple beans, even 1.5 second can be reduced to not needing to initialize JMS, mail chains, and senders. You can have your trimmed starter dependencies and remove the transitive dependencies. Even getting the data dependencies, adding into class path into the jars also takes time. So you can save 1 second here also. You can use the database tweaking. You can initialize the database later with the lazy initializations, or not even there at all at the lower environments. You can always keep the scripts up and running for the production ones. So avoid blocking IO calls to database, and it will prevent you 2 to 3 seconds. Native image is completely optional. It is a very big improvement, but a very much heavy effort. To create the image at the build time itself, a lot of code changes has to be done, that too breaking code changes. But it prevents the highest amount of time during the cold start, that is more than 10 seconds is prevented with native image. And then you can make the use of these actuator startup and this JMeter testing to find out the bottlenecks and where the actual problem lies, and that will also impact your cold start application. So net cold start can go down. If it was initially 13 seconds, you can come down to 5 seconds for JVM builds and even lower for the GraalVM images. So that is the cold start, the issues with the cold start, and the benefits you get if you reduce the cold start time and optimize your cold start time to be very less during your scaling and all those things. Now, in the second question is, in your experience, what is the most common production issue that you have faced in Spring Boot, and how did you proactively prevent them? Now, here's the list of production issues that we have repeatedly faced in a Spring Boot microservice application. And this preventing them is very important, because in the real-time production environment, especially dealing with microservices at a scale with K8, these problems becomes the big critical issues. The first issue that we faced was a memory leak and out-of-memory error. The root cause of those were found to be the DB connection pool issues. We were instantiating the very heavy DB connection pools every time, with all the insert and update things, and it was giving us the out of memory exception. Also, there were many blocking HTTP REST endpoint calls, and if the second microservice is down, we are blocked and we becomes either become the timeout or we have the memory leaks. The second issue we found was with the unbounded caches, that too in memory caches. That was also a problem because my in memory is very limited, and if I use that for caching unlimited number of data on objects, we becomes out of memory. Also, when we have a very large multi-part file to be sent from one place to another and we don't handle it properly and gracefully as the multi-parts, that also gives us a problem of large object and static references staying in the memory and giving us out of memory exception. And the prevention that we have done is we have made that our Hikari maximum pool size should not be more than 10, and there we limit the connection pool size, and after that if you try to open the connections, then we are expected to use a singleton object of the DB connection, so that only one connection and all the operation can be done on that particular connection. You can also add the limit to the cache size if you have to go with the in-memory cache, but I would suggest go for external caches like Redis. You can also use micrometer and JMeters and visual VM for understanding how your memory leaks are happening, and what if a number of requests are being had, how would you handle it? The second issue that we faced a lot in microservice architecture is the thread pool exhaustion. Because we have the REST API calls, asynchronous blocking calls, too many HTTP and database calls, and without a size limit gives us the problem of thread pool exhaustion. And the best way we handled it is through, if it has to be IO, I prefer using the reactive code with the web client, where the thread selection is beautifully handled by the Flux and the Monos. So reactive, web Flux reactive is the one beautiful solution of preventing the thread pool exhaustion. The second beautiful way is to use the bounded thread pools. And the third way is to use proper actuator matrices for JVM live threads in C, where my threads are getting overloaded. The third issue I found in production deployment of these microservices, that we forgot completely about the cold start delays, and when there was a sale situation, when we have to go all with auto scaling of 10-15 pods simultaneously to be up at the same time, all of them took more than 15-20 seconds to do the instantiation, and in those particular time we lost a lot of requests. So this cold start delays gives a lot of business impact on our situation, and how we prevented it is we have given all the ways there. We have lazy initializations of our bean. We have disabled all the beans which are not actually auto configured and is not needed. We have removed unnecessary transitive dependencies added by the Spring starters. We have used GraalVM native image for serverless architecture and functions. And we have used this actuator startup to give all the details of all the beans who were lazy, who were eagerly initialized and becomes the bottleneck during the cold start instantiation. And we have made them lazy initialized later on. The fourth issue that we found in microservice Spring Boot application is the cascading failures. Suppose there is a order service, payment service, and delivery service. If the payment service is down, your order service keeps on waiting for taking the payment, and the payment is down. Then you keep on waiting like a synchronous REST blocking call until the failure actually happens with 503 or 500. So the prevention of this is timeouts and proper retries. Whenever you create a web client, you can provide the timeout that you try for these many seconds. Otherwise, drop and says the application is not available for the synchronous call. You can also use circuit breaker patterns to prevent any kind of full crash situation. The fifth problem that I found in the production level Spring Boot application is unbounded log file. So you suppose you are logging few things and you keep on appending to that log, that becomes KBs and MBs and GBs of file during the tenure of your 10 years or more years of your application. Then too much of logging, especially at the debug level, and no proper tracing ID and log ID or Splunk span ID will give you a terrible problems and understanding where your application went wrong. So unbounded log files and their missing context is a problem. How you can fix it? You can use the rolling policy of log back. That is, go to maximum of 10 MB of files and then start rewriting from the initial position of the file, so that at any point of time your logs are not more than 10 MBs. You can use proper sleuth or micrometer tracing to be able to add proper traces in all the requests getting out of the system. The sixth problem is that I found a lot of places in the production is that they have misconfigured the scores or CSRF issues, and they have misconfigured the filters also. So first of all, you have to have all your endpoints authorized and authenticated. Only the UI or the login page should be unauthorized. Apart from that, each and every should be authorized. Enable codes and CQRS only if it is needed, and use a scanner like the OWASP to be able to figure out where your security issues are happening. There's a seventh silent feature, that is you have missing adding the observability to your failures. So if you have proper alerts on the failures and proper logs, you will be able to figure out that this is where my application went wrong. So how would you prevent that? You can use Micrometer with Prometheus and Grafana for proper logging. You can add also the alerts on the failures that there is a 400 bad request coming continuously from this particular system. You can add the custom matrices and use the health check and distributed tracing to trace the proper request. So observability is a very big miss. If you have stopped properly logging your data, you will not be able to figure out where your application went wrong. The eighth is the version mismatch. Suppose there is a client getting the version with the older endpoint, that is V1, and you have now upgraded to V2, then the backward compatibility is broken, and if you have not handled it properly with V1 and V2 management, you will be doomed. Also, we have found illogical retry options. Like suppose there is a DB call or the Kafka call. Now, if there is a 400 bad request, that is the request that you're trying to send to the Kafka or to the Couchbase is the badly formed URL or the badly formed data, then the 400 bad request is also retried a number of times. And what we have done is we have added infinite retries without any backoff. This is the worst possible thing you can do in your application. If you are going to have the HTTP calls, IO calls, you have to have the proper resilience 4J and proper retries with exponential backoff created with maximum number of attempts to be retried. If you don't do this, your application will go into infinite doomed state. The last and the most common thing I've seen is people hard coding the properties rather than making it property driven and preventing the deployments only for the change of the properties, which is configurable at the runtime. So what you should rather do is you can use Spring Cloud Config, the key vaults and other stuff to give your configurations rather than just hard coding as it is in your application's code. So the problems and the proactive fixes we have done is we found memory leaks. We monitored it using J meters and all those things, profilings, and prevented the memory leaks. If you have the thread exhaustion, that means you have not properly handled your thread management. You can either go Webflux or IO calls can all go towards the reactive chain. The third issue is the slow startup or the cold start is very high. It was not optimized. You can always fix this by lazy initialization using actuators, removing the auto configurations of the file not needed at the startup. There is a cascading failure in the system, and if you have not properly handled the circuit breakers or resilient force, then we are doomed. The fifth issue we found was the log issue. There was unbounded log file. We have not used log rotation on the files, and the size of the log file becomes 50 MB, 60 MB, even in GBs, and we were doomed. The security issue of not using proper secure endpoints, that is being hacked and it is being wrongly used, is also a common feature in production. The lack of observability and tracing and micrometer and health checks is also a problem. Versioning is also a big problem because it will give you the it will not help you with the backward compatibility, it will give you the breaking changes. Also, you should never hard code anything in the code base, because in the production I've seen many people hard coding the properties, which is completely dynamic and might change in going forward future. You should always give it to the properties file or in the cloud Spring Cloud configs or the vaults. The third very common question nowadays I've been asked in interviews is, how would you handle backward incompatible API changes? Now let's understand with a real-time scenario. Suppose you have an e-commerce website, there is a product catalog service or the product service. Now that product service, on giving a particular ID, gives the details of that product, that this is the name, this is the ID of the product, and this is the $4.99 is the price of the product. Now, I suppose want to change this. I have a sale going on, I have a discounted price, and I have to add the availability in the stock terms and delivery also. Then I can add the price as MRP and discounted price, and I have the stock is available and estimated delivery days is 3. Now this change is not backward compatible because price initially would be handled as a number. Now this price will be handled as the custom object with the MRP and discounted price. So this is the non-backward compatible code. And how do you handle it? You can add the V1 as the old version and V2 as the new version. You can keep your old controller untouched while you can create two different DTOs, the older product V1 DTO where the price was still integer, while the product V2 version, which is having the price is the custom price, where there is two integers, that is MRP and discounted price, and hence you prevent the old customers to be able to be forced to modify their response handling. The third very important thing you have to do in such situation is to do the feature toggle. Suppose the feature toggle says, okay, if the new feature toggle is enabled, I'm going to give you the response in the V2 mapper. Otherwise, just get the entity in the V1 one. And then use the contract to make sure that V1 response structure is unchanged while V2 is as per the new contract. And then later on, you can deprecate this particular V1 and just go full on with the V2. And gradually move from V1 to V2. What is the result of this versioning? No downtime for clients. Your older clients will be happy with your V1 where they just need the price. Whether it is discounted or MRP, they don't care. They just need the price which is currently being sold in the store. The good thing is you have the full flexibility to your consumers, be it the front end UI or the back end services, to be migrated at their own pace. You don't have to hastily move as soon as we make the change. They do not have the breaking change. They don't have to right away migrate to the new version. They don't have to do that. Also, there is a long-term maintenance with separate DTO and versioning, which is very good. So the key takeaways is that avoid the breaking clients by API and API versioning. Isolate the changes by separating the two different DTOs. You can gradually roll out from V1 to V2 with the feature flag evaluation. And you can communicate your changes that this is the change, this is a good to have functionality. If you want, you can migrate or you can continue using it and slowly, gradually migrate, taking the stories in the agile environment. But there's a very one common problem that I nowadays see is that the older people have not versioned their APIs. So what they have done is they have left their /API/product as it is. But now they want to version it and make the new changes as V2. So what you can do is, it's never a contract written said that your first version has to be named as V1. You can leave the /API/product as it is and we can assume that this is a V1. You don't have to explicitly add it. Introduce a new version with /V2 and now you can start with V2, V3, V4 and those kinds of versionings. I have many more things to cover, like how the inter-service communication happens with REST APIs, gRPC and event-driven, and what is a trade-off that exists between them. This is a very common question. I have many more things to cover, like what is a trade-off between them, how do you handle large files, it should not be in memory, it should be at a temporary location, and a lot thing I have to cover. So if you want the next video for the interview questions right now being asked in 2035 with the senior developers, just let me know in the comment section. I'll create another video for this. Thank you.